Let's move on to processing this form. But first, I want to make a few quick changes. One, clearly these inputs are way too long. Let's fix that by returning to our create view, and maybe we'll wrap this within a bootstrap row. And then I will give this form a class of call medium6. So let's hide the sidebar, switch back to Chrome, give that a refresh, and there we go. That's a little more appropriate. Next, personally, I like my form inputs to be a little bit taller. So we can see here are the settings that Bootstrap provides. Why don't we bump up the height to about 38 or 39 pixels? So I will return to Sublime, visit app.scss, and now we could either edit Bootstrap directly, or if you just want to override it after the fact, you can do that as well. Maybe something like import partials/form, and then I will create that, sass partials form, or forms.scss, and then we'll say form control, height is 39 pixels. Okay, so let's fix that. I will then run gulp, and we're good to go. So if I switch back to Chrome, give that a refresh, yeah, it stays the same. Okay, so that's one tweak. Next, it occurred to me, if we visit our create photos or flyer photos table, we named the column that holds the photo path photo. And this might have made sense if we stored a single photo on the flyers table. That way you could say flyer photo, and presumably that would be the path. But in this case where we might have a photos model or a photo model, well, that doesn't really make sense, right? Instead, we could do something like photo path. I think that's better. So let's update that. And because we're using migrations, this stuff is so easy. Okay, so let's run that. I'm going to go into my VM here, go into code and project flyer, and say PHP artisan migrate refresh. Just roll back all of the migrations and rerun them. Cool, so we fixed those two things. Okay, now we can move on to processing the form. So when the user fills all of this out and they submit it, well, remember, we have a resource in place. So that means we'd send a post request to flyers. And don't forget, you can always run PHP artisan route list to view all of the routes in your application. In this case, here's the one we want. Okay, so that will hit flyers controller at store. Now, what exactly do we need to do here? Well, we have to validate the request or validate the form. We need to persist the flyer into our database table. And then, well, presumably we would redirect to the landing page. So we get all that form data, we process it, and we redirect them to a landing page, which they can then share with anyone in the world. All right, so let's get started. When we validate the form, you actually have two ways to do this in Laravel, or actually more. You can do a custom solution, or out of the box, you can call a validate method directly on your controller. And if I scroll up and visit the base controller, that's because we use this validates request trait. Very convenient, great for simple forms. Now, if we return though, in our case, well, there's actually a number of fields here, and maybe more once we continue working on this. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to stick with a form request. PHP artisan make a form request called, and we just want something that describes this form. Why don't we say flyer request? Okay, so back in Sublime, if you're not familiar with this, we can go into app, HTTP, requests, and there you go. Now, authorize. Does the user have authorization to make this request? Yes, they do. Next, what are the rules? Now, this will be pretty simple. So for example, the street is required. So we can say street required. We'll do a couple of these together, and then I'll do the rest behind the scenes. It's a little boring to watch. The city is required. We need a zip code. And like I said, I'll do the rest of these behind the scenes. And there we go. That's fine for a first pass. All right, so we have our flyer request. If I switch back to our flyers controller, you'll see that by default, the generator type hints request. So it gives us a basic Illuminate HTTP request, but also it will import app HTTP requests. So that means if you want to pull in your flyer request, you could say requests, flyer request, or you could just import that full path and reference this. It's up to you. Now, remember, the way form requests work is you will never hit the body of this method unless the request validates. So that means if we execute anything within here, the form has validated. Otherwise, if it does not, well, let's see what happens. Back to Chrome, create flyer, and well, one, we get a token mismatch exception, only because we forgot to add our CRF token. We'll do that right up here within our partial. So we'll say we need our CRF field here. Okay, if I come back and view the source, we should see it right here. Great. So once again, if we submit this, notice it just redirects back here. But in this case, we don't show any errors. So why don't we add that maybe at the very top or at the bottom, wherever. If we want to do the top, maybe we could say, and I have a snippet for this, if we have any errors, then within a alert div, filter through each error and display them within a list item. So now if we try it out, it redirects us back and we can see all of our mistakes. And we can even do some other HTML5 validation. For example, we can do things like this, required. You must fill all of these fields out. Couple more, and there we go. Okay, so now it won't even allow you to submit the form in modern browsers if you have not populated these. Okay, so next, if we switch back to our Flyers controller, and you know what, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and import that full path. Like so. Okay, so now we have validated the request. Next, we need to persist the flyer. So remember, we have an app flyer model, so we can say flyer create, and then we can pass through, at least for this initial draft, the request data. And that'll be an array that maps to the columns. So what we'll need to do is visit the flyer model and set our fillable fields to protect against mass assignment exceptions. So for example, you can mass assign the street, the city, the state, the country, the zip code, the price, and the description. And we'll say right here, fillable fields for a flyer. Now, one quick thing. Don't forget, we added this photos file uploader here, but really we're going to be using a special tool for that. And we won't cover that just yet, maybe in the next video. So what I'll do is visit our form partial, scroll to the bottom, and get rid of that entirely. That's not how we're going to handle this. Okay, so we have a simpler form here. We have validation for it. We have mass assignment protection for it. So within our controller, to create a new flyer, we can say flyer create. And I'm going to go ahead and import that at the top so I can do this. Finally, we want to redirect to the landing page. So we could say something like redirect. And you know what? As far as redirecting to the landing page, I'm not even sure what that will look like just yet. We're going to tackle that in the next video or the one after that. So what we do here will be temporary. Why don't we just redirect back to the form? And on that note, we also probably need some kind of flash messaging system. So maybe that's what we'll tackle in the next video. All right, validate the form, create the flyer, eventually show a flash message, and then redirect wherever we need to go. Let's try this out. Like so, create the flyer. We redirect back to the form. Remember, we don't have a flash message just yet to give us any kind of indication, but that's okay. If we say PHP Artisan Tinker, and then do app flyer all, we should see it listed here, and we do. So now that we've handled this part, in the next video, we will write an elegant system for displaying flash messages, and then following that, we'll figure out a nice, attractive way to display all of this information.